The desert sun burned mercilessly over the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province as Captain Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his brow. His radio crackled with static as he tried to maintain contact with base command. Something felt wrong. The intelligence reports had been too clean, too perfect. Enemy positions marked with precision that seemed almost too good to be true. Morrison commanded Bravo Company, part of a larger Marine expeditionary unit consisting of 540 Marines spread across 3 companies. Their mission seemed straightforward enough: clear a series of Taliban strongholds in the valley below, and secure the area for incoming humanitarian aid. The operation, codenamed Desert Shield, was supposed to be a routine sweep and clear. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez adjusted her scope from her position on the ridge 2 kilometers away. As the unit's designated marksman, she had been tasked with providing overwatch for the operation. Her Barrett M82A1 rifle lay beside her, its powerful .50 caliber rounds capable of reaching targets at extraordinary distances. She had earned her position through years of dedication and training that many of her male counterparts initially questioned. Growing up in East Los Angeles, Maria had learned to shoot at her grandfather's ranch in Texas. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had taught her that precision and patience were more valuable than raw firepower. "Mija," he would say, "anyone can spray bullets. It takes skill to make each shot count." Those words had guided her through Marine Corps training and multiple deployments. The 3 companies had moved into position during the pre-dawn hours. Alpha Company took the eastern approach, Bravo held the center, and Charlie Company moved to secure the western flank. The plan called for a coordinated advance that would squeeze the estimated 50 Taliban fighters into a kill zone where they could be neutralized or captured. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes coordinated the operation from his command post 3 kilometers behind the front lines. A seasoned officer with over 20 years of service, Hayes had planned hundreds of similar operations. The intelligence package had come from multiple sources: satellite imagery, local informants, and previous reconnaissance missions. Everything indicated a manageable enemy force with limited heavy weapons. As the Marines began their advance, Maria noticed movement through her scope that didn't match the intelligence reports. Instead of the expected 50 fighters, she was seeing dozens of muzzle flashes from positions that weren't supposed to exist. Her training kicked in as she began counting and mapping the enemy positions. What she saw made her blood run cold. The Taliban had spent weeks preparing for this operation. They had constructed a complex network of interconnected bunkers, spider holes, and fighting positions that turned the entire valley into a death trap. More concerning was the evidence of heavy weapons. She could see the distinctive signatures of mounted machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and what appeared to be mortar positions. Morrison's voice came through the radio with increasing urgency. "Overwatch, this is Bravo 6. We're taking heavy fire from positions not marked on our maps. Requesting immediate support." The professional calm in his voice couldn't hide the growing desperation of their situation. Maria keyed her radio. "Bravo 6, this is Overwatch. I count approximately 200 enemy fighters in prepared positions. You're walking into a coordinated ambush. Recommend immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Alpha." But withdrawal was already impossible. The Taliban had allowed the Marines to advance deep into the valley before springing their trap. Escape routes had been pre-sighted by enemy machine gunners, and the rocky terrain that had seemed like an advantage during planning now became a maze of death. Alpha Company was the first to take casualties. Their point squad walked directly into a kill zone where 3 machine gun positions had interlocking fields of fire. Within seconds, 6 Marines were down, and the rest were pinned behind inadequate cover. Company Commander Captain Sarah Chun tried to maneuver her Marines to safety, but every movement drew deadly accurate fire. Charlie Company fared little better. They had advanced along what appeared to be a dried riverbed, only to discover that the Taliban had turned it into a funnel. Improvised explosive devices detonated among the lead elements, while fighters opened fire from elevated positions on both sides. The Marines found themselves trapped in a depression with limited cover and no easy escape routes. Bravo Company, in the center of the formation, bore the brunt of the enemy's attention. Morrison watched helplessly as his Marines took cover behind rocks and in small depressions. The enemy fire was so intense that any attempt to move resulted in immediate suppression. His radio operator, Corporal Johnson, had already taken shrapnel from a near miss by a rocket-propelled grenade. From her position, Maria could see the entire battlefield spread out below her. The Marines were scattered across nearly 2 square kilometers of broken ground, separated into small groups that couldn't support each other. The Taliban fighters moved with practiced coordination, maintaining their fire, while others repositioned to exploit weaknesses in the Marine positions. Her grandfather's voice echoed her memory. Mija, sometimes one well-placed shot can change everything. But you have to have the patience to wait for the right moment and the courage to take it when it comes. Maria began the methodical process of identifying high-value targets. Through her scope, she could see Taliban commanders moving between positions, coordinating their fighters. She also identified several crew-served weapons positions that were causing the most damage to the trapped Marines. But at 2 kilometers distance, even her powerful rifle would be pushing the limits of effective engagement. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature in the valley began to soar. The Marines had been expecting a quick operation and hadn't brought sufficient water for a prolonged engagement. Ammunition was also becoming a concern as the intense firefight continued without pause. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes coordinated frantically with higher command for support. Close air support was available, but couldn't engage effectively due to the proximity of friendly and enemy forces. Artillery support faced the same limitation. The Marines were too close to the enemy positions for indirect fire support to be safely employed. Medical evacuation was impossible under the current conditions. The landing zones were all under direct enemy observation and fire. Several Marines had been wounded, and their conditions would only worsen as the day progressed without medical attention. Maria made her decision. Despite the extreme range and challenging conditions, she had to act. The Marines below were counting on her, even if they didn't know it. She began calculating wind speed, temperature, humidity, and the dozens of other variables that would affect her shots at this distance. Her first target was a Taliban commander she had observed directing fire from multiple positions. He wore distinctive white clothing and carried a radio, making him clearly identifiable as a leadership figure. Taking out command and control elements would disrupt the coordinated nature of the ambush. Maria controlled her breathing and settled into her shooting position. The weight of 540 Marines' lives pressed down on her as she prepared to engage targets at a distance most people couldn't even imagine. Her grandfather's training, years of Marine Corps marksmanship instruction, and countless hours of practice had brought her to this moment. The first shot would announce her presence to every Taliban fighter in the valley. After that, she would become a priority target. But the Marines below needed someone to even the odds, and she was the only one in position to do it. Through her scope, she watched the Taliban commander raise his radio to his mouth. This was her moment. Maria took a deep breath, exhaled halfway, and gently squeezed the trigger of her Barrett rifle. The massive weapon bucked against her shoulder as the .50 caliber round began its 2-kilometer journey toward the target. In the valley below, the Marines continued their desperate fight for survival, unaware that help was coming from an unexpected direction. The battle for their lives was about to take a dramatic turn, but they didn't know it yet. All they knew was that they were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. The Taliban fighters maintained their pressure, confident in their numerical superiority and prepared positions. They had no idea that a single Marine sniper was about to change the entire dynamic of the engagement from a distance that seemed impossible. As the sun continued to climb and the temperature soared, the stage was set for one of the most remarkable displays of precision marksmanship in military history. The outcome of the battle, and The lives of 540 Marines would depend on the skill, courage, and determination of one female sniper armed with unwavering resolve and deadly accuracy. The Taliban commander's head snapped backward as Maria's first shot found its mark. The massive .50 caliber bullet traveled the 2-kilometer distance in just over 2 seconds, striking with devastating effect. Through her scope, Maria watched as chaos erupted around the fallen commander. Taliban fighters scattered from their positions, unsure where the shot had originated. But Maria was already acquiring her next target. Years of training had taught her that follow-up shots needed to come quickly before the enemy could react and take cover. Her second target was the operator of a heavy machine gun that had been devastating Alpha Company's positions. The gunner was positioned behind a stone wall, with only his upper torso visible. The Barrett rifle's distinctive crack echoed across the valley again. This time, the heavy machine gun fell silent permanently. The sudden cessation of its suppressing fire gave Alpha Company Marines their first opportunity to move in nearly an hour. Captain Chun immediately began repositioning her most exposed squads to better cover. Down in the valley, the Marines still had no idea where the supporting fire was coming from. To them, it appeared that Taliban fighters were simply dropping dead or abandoning positions for no apparent reason. Captain Morrison keyed his radio, trying to understand what was happening. All stations, this is Bravo 6. Are we receiving sniper support? Over. Negative, Bravo 6, came the reply from Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. No sniper teams are assigned to your sector. But Maria continued her deadly work. She had identified a mortar position that posed a significant threat to all 3 Marine companies. The Taliban mortar team had been dropping rounds with increasing accuracy, and it was only a matter of time before they achieved direct hits on Marine positions. The mortar crew worked behind a low stone wall approximately 1,800 meters from Maria's position. Calculating the ballistics for this shot required accounting for the changing environmental conditions. The temperature had risen significantly since her first engagement, affecting air density and, therefore, bullet trajectory. Wind patterns in the valley were complex, with thermal currents creating unpredictable air movements. Maria's third shot eliminated the mortar team's gunner. Her fourth shot, fired just seconds later, took out the assistant gunner who had attempted to take over the weapon. The mortar position fell silent, removing a critical threat to the trapped Marines. The psychological effect of these precise eliminations began to take hold among the Taliban fighters. Their disciplined ambush was becoming disorganized as key personnel disappeared without explanation. Some fighters began abandoning their positions to seek better cover, inadvertently exposing themselves to Marine return fire. Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez, a squad leader with Bravo Company, noticed the change immediately. Marines, something's got these bastards spooked. They're breaking discipline. Why give the word, we're going to bow them by teams to that ridge line. Rodriguez had served 3 previous deployments and recognized an opportunity when he saw one. The Taliban fighters who had maintained strict fire discipline for over an hour were now firing wildly and moving erratically. This was the first break the Marines had been given since the ambush began. Maria continued her systematic elimination of high-value targets. Her 5th shot took out a Taliban fighter who had been directing rocket-propelled grenade teams. The man had been using a pair of binoculars to spot targets for multiple RPG teams, coordinating their fire for maximum effect. With his elimination, the RPG attacks became sporadic and poorly aimed. Communication between Taliban positions began breaking down as Maria eliminated radio operators and commanders. The sophisticated coordination that had made the ambush so effective was deteriorating. Individual fighting positions began operating independently, reducing their collective effectiveness. Charlie Company seized the opportunity to begin extracting their wounded. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Jennifer Liu had been treating casualties under fire for over an hour, performing life-saving medical procedures while bullets cracked overhead. With the enemy fire becoming less coordinated, she could finally move wounded Marines to safer positions. Doc Liu's been incredible, reported Charlie Company's First Sergeant Mike Thompson over the radio. "She's kept 3 Marines alive who should have been Kia. We need to get these wounded out as soon as possible." Maria's Barrett rifle was beginning to show the effects of sustained rapid fire. The barrel was extremely hot, and she could see heat mirage affecting her scope picture. Each shot was pushing the weapon system beyond its normal operating parameters, but she couldn't afford to let the rifle cool down. The Marines below needed continuous pressure maintained on the enemy. Her 6th shot eliminated a Taliban sniper who had been targeting Marine squad leaders. The enemy marksman had already wounded 2 Marine sergeants and was attempting to systematically eliminate the small unit leadership that held the Marine positions together. Maria had observed his muzzle flashes and calculated his position based on the geometry of his shots. The Taliban sniper's elimination had an immediate effect on Marine morale. Word spread quickly through the units that someone was providing precision fires against enemy marksmen. Even though they didn't know the source, the Marines began to feel that they weren't facing the enemy alone. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez made his move. Alpha Team bound to that cluster of rocks. Bravo Team covering fire. His Marines moved with practiced precision, covering 50 meters of open ground before the Taliban fighters could react effectively. For the first time since the ambush began, Marines were advancing rather than simply surviving. Alpha Company followed suit. Captain Chun coordinated a series of short tactical movements that began consolidating her scattered squads. The Taliban fighters were still dangerous and numerous, but their coordinated resistance was crumbling under the pressure of Maria's precision fires and the Marines' aggressive response. Maria identified her next target, a Taliban commander who was attempting to regain control of the deteriorating situation. The man was moving between positions with a small group of fighters, trying to restore coordination to the ambush. He carried himself with the confidence of experienced leadership and was clearly attempting to rally his forces. At 2,100 meters, this would be Maria's longest shot of the engagement. The target was moving, the environmental conditions were challenging, and her rifle was operating at the edge of its thermal limits. But the success of the Marine breakout depended on preventing the Taliban from reorganizing their defense. Maria tracked the target through her scope, calculating his movement pattern and speed. She would have one opportunity when he paused at a fighting position to give instructions to the defenders. The shot would require leading the target and accounting for the bullet's flight time over the extended distance. The Barrett rifle cracked again, and Maria watched through her scope as the Taliban commander dropped. The fighters around him immediately took cover, and the attempted reorganization collapsed. Without effective leadership, the Taliban positions began to operate as isolated strongpoints rather than a coordinated defense. This was the break the Marines had been waiting for. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes coordinated a general advance by all 3 companies. The Marines bounded forward by fire teams and squads, using the confusion in the Taliban ranks to gain ground and consolidate their positions. "All stations, this is Overlord," Hayes transmitted. "Unknown friendly sniper is providing precision fires in support of our advance. All units exploit the opportunity and push forward." Maria continued engaging targets of opportunity. A machine gun team that had repositioned to counter the Marine advance became her 8th successful engagement. An RPG team attempting to target the advancing Marines became her 9th. Each shot further degraded the Taliban's ability to mount effective resistance. The enemy fighters found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't identify the source of the precision fires that were systematically eliminating their key personnel. The Marines they had ambushed were now advancing aggressively. Escape routes that had been carefully planned were now covered by advancing Marine units. Some Taliban fighters began abandoning their positions entirely, attempting to escape through the rocky terrain of the valley walls. But Maria could see these movements from her elevated position and engaged fleeing enemy personnel who posed continuing threats to the Marine advance. Hospital Corpsman Liu continued her heroic medical work, now able to move more freely as the Marine perimeter expanded. Several wounded Marines who had been trapped in exposed positions were finally brought to safety and given proper medical attention. Her actions under fire had prevented what could have been much higher casualties among the Marine units. As the Marines consolidated their gains, the true scope of the Taliban ambush became apparent. The enemy had constructed an elaborate network of fighting positions with interlocking fields of fire, prepared ammunition caches, and planned withdrawal routes. Only the unexpected intervention of precise long-range fires had disrupted their carefully laid plans. The tide of battle had turned, but the engagement was far from over. Significant numbers of Taliban fighters remained in prepared positions, and they still possessed heavy weapons capable of inflicting serious casualties. The Marines had gained the initiative, but converting that advantage into decisive victory would require continued pressure and coordination. Maria checked her ammunition supply and assessed her rifle's condition. The Barrett had performed magnificently under extreme conditions, but she needed to manage her remaining rounds carefully. The engagement was entering a new phase, and the Marines below would continue to need precision fire support to complete their mission. Through her scope, she could see Marine squads advancing with renewed confidence. The impossible situation that had faced 540 Marines just hours earlier was transforming into a coordinated assault. But Maria knew that the most dangerous phase of any battle often came when the enemy realized they were losing and fought with the desperation of cornered animals. The Taliban fighters who remained in the valley realized their carefully planned ambush was collapsing. Desperation began to drive their actions as they understood that escape was becoming increasingly unlikely. Some of the more experienced fighters among them recognized that their only chance for survival lay in making the Marine advance as costly as possible. A group of Taliban fighters had taken position in a reinforced compound at the center of the valley. The structure offered excellent protection and commanded key terrain that the Marines would need to control to secure the area. From her observation position, Maria could see approximately 30 fighters moving into the compound, including several who carried heavy weapons. Captain Morrison coordinated with Alpha and Charlie companies to surround the compound, but the building's thick walls and strategic position made it a formidable defensive position. Direct assault would result in heavy Marine casualties, and the structure was too close to friendly forces for artillery or air support. Overwatch, this is Bravo 6, Morrison transmitted. Can you identify enemy positions in the compound at Grid 41 SMQ 12345 67890? Maria adjusted her scope to examine the target building. The compound consisted of a main structure with several outbuildings, surrounded by a stone wall approximately 6 feet high. She could see multiple firing positions where Taliban fighters had established machine guns and RPG teams. The main entrance faced away from the Marine positions, making direct assault extremely difficult. Through careful observation, Maria identified the compound's key vulnerabilities. A Taliban commander was visible in an upper-floor window, apparently coordinating the defense. 2 heavy machine gun positions covered the approaches most likely to be used by advancing Marines. An RPG team was positioned to engage any vehicles that might attempt to support the assault. Her first shot into the compound eliminated the visible commander. The .50 caliber round penetrated the window and wall, creating a massive shower of debris that forced other fighters to seek cover. This shot demonstrated to the defenders that even their reinforced position wasn't safe from the mysterious sniper supporting the Marines. The psychological effect was immediate. Taliban fighters who had been confidently preparing their defense suddenly realized they were vulnerable even inside their fortified position. Some abandoned their posts to seek better cover deeper inside the building, disrupting their defensive coordination. Maria's second shot targeted one of the machine gun positions. The heavy bullet didn't just eliminate the gunner. It destroyed the weapon itself, sending metal fragments throughout the position. The remaining machine gunner abandoned his post rather than risk becoming the next target. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez seized the opportunity. First squad, suppressive fire on the compound. Second squad, bound to the wall. Third squad, prepare to breach on my command. His Marines moved with practiced efficiency, using the confusion created by Maria's shots to close distance on the fortified position. But the Taliban weren't finished. A group of fighters had positioned themselves in a drainage ditch that ran along the eastern side of the valley. From this concealed position, they could fire into the flanks of any Marine units advancing on the compound. The ditch provided excellent cover and concealment, making it nearly impossible for the advancing Marines to detect. Maria spotted the hidden position through movement and muzzle flashes. The fighters in the ditch had maintained excellent fire discipline, only exposing themselves when they had clear shots at the advancing Marines. Their position threatened to turn the Marine assault into another deadly trap. At nearly 2,300 meters, engaging targets in the drainage ditch require Maria to push her equipment and skills to their absolute limits. The targets were partially concealed, appearing only briefly when they rose to fire. Environmental conditions continued to deteriorate as afternoon winds created unpredictable air currents in the valley. Maria's shot at the lead fighter in the drainage ditch required precise timing. She tracked the target's pattern of exposure, calculated his likely next appearance, and prepared her shot. When the Taliban fighter rose to engage Marines advancing on the compound, Maria's bullet was already in flight. The elimination of the flanking position allowed the Marines to continue their assault on the compound. Alpha Company Marines reached the outer wall and began preparing breaching charges. But as they worked, Maria detected movement that indicated the Taliban were preparing a counterattack. A large group of Taliban fighters had assembled in a wadi approximately 800 meters south of the compound. These fighters had remained hidden during the initial ambush and were now preparing to hit the Marines from behind while they were focused on the compound assault. The counterattack force numbered at least 40 fighters and included several crew-served weapons. All stations, this is Overwatch, Maria transmitted. Large enemy force preparing to attack from the south. Approximately 40 fighters with heavy weapons moving to Grid 41 SMQ 12340 67885. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes received the warning and immediately began repositioning units to counter the threat. But the Marines were stretched thin across the valley floor, and repositioning would take time they might not have. The Taliban counterattack was already in motion. Maria began engaging the counterattack force at maximum range. Her first shots targeted the leaders who were directing the movement. Without effective command and control, the Taliban fighters would have difficulty coordinating their assault. Each shot forced the counterattack force to take cover and disrupted their advance timing. The Taliban fighters attempting the counterattack found themselves caught in open ground as Maria's precision fires picked off their leadership. Some sought cover in a small cluster of buildings, but this only delayed their advance rather than stopping it. The remaining fighters continued moving toward the Marine positions. Hospital Corpsman Liu had established a casualty collection point behind the main Marine line. Several wounded Marines were receiving treatment, including 2 with serious injuries that required immediate evacuation. The Taliban counterattack threatened to overrun the medical position and the wounded Marines who couldn't be moved. "Doc, we need to displace the casualty collection point," urged First Sergeant Thompson. "Those wounded need to be moved to safety." But moving seriously wounded Marines across the broken terrain of the valley floor was extremely dangerous. One Marine had taken shrapnel to the abdomen and required constant medical attention. Another had suffered a compound fracture of a leg and couldn't walk without assistance. Maria watched the developing situation through her scope. The Taliban counterattack was being slowed, but not stopped by her long-range fires. Marine units were repositioning to meet the threat, but the timing was going to be extremely close. The wounded Marines at the casualty collection point were in serious danger. She made a tactical decision to shift her focus entirely to the counterattack force. The compound assault would have to proceed without her direct support, while she dealt with the more immediate threat to the wounded Marines and their medical personnel. Her shots began falling among the advancing Taliban fighters with devastating effect. At ranges between 1,500 and 2,000 meters, Maria systematically eliminated the most dangerous threats. An RPG team preparing to engage the casualty collection point became her priority target. The Taliban fighters found themselves unable to coordinate their assault as their leadership was systematically eliminated. What had been planned as a coordinated attack devolved into small groups of fighters making uncoordinated rushes toward Marine positions. This played directly into the Marines' advantages in small unit tactics and firepower. Alpha Company breached the compound wall just as the Taliban counterattack reached its closest point to the Marine lines. The timing couldn't have been more critical. If the compound hadn't fallen when it did, the Marines would have been fighting on two fronts simultaneously against prepared enemy positions. Compound secure, reported Captain Chun. 15 enemy Kia, unknown number fled through rear exit, were consolidated and ready to support defensive positions. The Taliban counterattack ground to a halt as Maria's precision fires and Marine defensive positions took their toll. The surviving attackers either retreated or sought cover in terrain that offered them no good firing positions. The immediate threat to the casualty collection point was neutralized. But the battle wasn't over. Intelligence reports indicated that additional Taliban forces were moving toward the valley from outlying areas. The initial ambush force had been larger than expected, and reinforcements could arrive at any time. The Marines needed to consolidate their positions and prepare for potential follow-on attacks. Maria conducted a systematic scan of the entire valley floor, looking for remaining threats and potential reinforcement routes. Her ammunition was running low after hours of sustained engagement, and her rifle was showing signs of extreme wear from the prolonged firing session. But the Marines below still needed her protection. Through her scope, she could see Marine squads moving with renewed confidence across terrain that had been a death trap just hours earlier. Medical evacuation helicopters were finally able to approach the landing zone as the threat from enemy heavy weapons had been largely eliminated. The wounded Marines would soon receive the advanced medical care they desperately needed. The transformation of the battlefield was remarkable. What had begun as a carefully planned Taliban ambush of overwhelming force had become a Marine victory through the combination of professional small unit tactics, individual heroism, and precision fires delivered at impossible ranges. But Maria knew that in military operations, victory was never complete until all Marines were safely extracted from the battle area. She maintained her watch over the valley as the Marines began the careful process of consolidating their gains, treating their wounded, and preparing for potential enemy reinforcement. Her role in turning the battle was far from over, and the final phase of the engagement would prove just as challenging as what had come before. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, Maria maintained her vigilant watch over the valley floor. The immediate crisis had passed, but military operations rarely concluded cleanly. Intelligence reports confirmed that Taliban reinforcements were moving toward the area from multiple directions, and the Marines needed to maintain security while conducting casualty evacuation and mission completion. Hospital corpsman Liu worked with desperate efficiency at the casualty collection point. The most seriously wounded Marine, Lance Corporal David Kim, had taken severe abdominal wounds from shrapnel early in the engagement. Despite her heroic efforts to stabilize him under fire, his condition was deteriorating rapidly. The medical evacuation helicopter couldn't reach them soon enough. "We're losing him," Liu reported grimly to First Sergeant Thompson. "I've done everything possible with the equipment I have, but he needs a surgical team immediately." The helicopter landing zone was finally secure enough for medical evacuation, but Taliban fighters still controlled several positions with clear lines of sight to the approach routes. Any helicopter attempting to land would be vulnerable to small arms fire and possible RPG attack. The Marines had cleared most of the immediate threats, but the valley still wasn't completely safe. Maria identified 3 remaining enemy positions that posed the greatest risk to medical evacuation operations. 2 Taliban fighters had taken cover in a rocky outcropping that commanded the primary landing zone. Another small group occupied a building that provided an excellent vantage point for engaging helicopters during their most vulnerable landing phase. Her ammunition count was critical. Only 4 rounds remained for her Barrett rifle, and each shot would need to count perfectly. There would be no opportunity for follow-up shots or target confirmation. Each engagement would have to achieve immediate neutralization of the threat. The first target was the Taliban fighter in the building overlooking the landing zone. Through her scope, Maria could see him preparing an RPG for launch. The weapon could easily down a medical evacuation helicopter, killing both the aircrew and preventing evacuation of wounded Marines. At 1,850 meters, this shot required accounting for significant wind drift and the target's partial concealment. Maria's shot shattered the window and eliminated the RPG threat permanently. The massive .50 caliber round continued through the building's interior, creating enough damage and debris to force any other occupants to abandon their positions. The primary threat to helicopter operations was neutralized. The 2 fighters in the rocky outcropping presented a more complex challenge. They were positioned approximately 50 meters apart, both with clear shots at the landing zone. Maria would need to eliminate both targets before either could react to her muzzle flash and take cover. With only 3 rounds remaining, this engagement would require perfect execution. Her second shot eliminated the first fighter in the rocks. Before his partner could react or take cover, Maria had already acquired the second target and fired again. Both threats to the landing zone were neutralized within seconds of each other, demonstrating the highest level of marksmanship skill under combat conditions. "Landing zone is secure," reported Captain Morrison. "Medical evacuation approved for immediate approach." The distinctive sound of approaching helicopters filled the valley as 2 UH-60 Blackhawks approached the landing zone. The lead aircraft carried a full surgical team prepared to provide advanced trauma care during flight. For Lance Corporal Kim and the other seriously wounded Marines, this represented their best chance for survival. But as the helicopters approached, Maria detected new movement in the valley's southern approaches. A large force of Taliban reinforcements was moving rapidly toward the Marine positions. Early estimates suggested at least 60 fighters, including several technical vehicles mounted with heavy weapons. The reinforcements would arrive just as the medical evacuation was taking place. "All stations, this is Overwatch," Maria transmitted. "Large enemy reinforcement approaching from the south. Multiple vehicles with crew-served weapons. ETA to engagement range approximately 10 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes faced an impossible decision. The medical evacuation was already in progress and couldn't be interrupted without risking the lives of wounded Marines. But the approaching enemy force was large enough to overrun the Marine positions if they weren't properly prepared to receive the attack. Maria had exactly 1 round remaining in her rifle. The approaching Taliban force was still beyond effective range for small arms, but within minutes they would reach positions where they could engage the Marines and the vulnerable medical helicopters. Her final shot would need to have maximum psychological and tactical impact. Through her scope, she identified the lead vehicle in the enemy convoy. It appeared to be a technical vehicle with a mounted heavy machine gun and several fighters. The vehicle was leading the convoy and likely carried the commander directing the reinforcement effort. Eliminating the lead vehicle would disrupt the convoy's advance and potentially cause confusion among the following vehicles. At nearly 2,500 meters, this would be the longest shot of the entire engagement. Environmental conditions had become increasingly challenging as afternoon winds created complex air currents throughout the valley. The target was moving, the range was extreme, and Maria would have no opportunity for a follow-up shot. She calculated the target's speed and direction accounted for wind drift and bullet drop, and prepared for what would likely be her final contribution to the battle. The wounded Marines were being loaded onto helicopters just as the enemy reinforcements reached their closest approach to Maria's position. Maria fired her last round and watched through her scope as the lead enemy vehicle suddenly swerved off the road and rolled. The convoy immediately stopped as fighters dismounted to assess the situation and provide medical aid to their injured comrades. The psychological shock of losing their lead vehicle to an invisible sniper created exactly the delay the Marines needed. Enemy convoy has stopped approximately 2,000 meters south of our positions, Maria reported. They appear to be regrouping. Medical evacuation should proceed immediately while we have the opportunity. The helicopters lifted off with the wounded Marines just as Taliban reinforcements resumed their advance. But the brief delay had allowed the Marines to establish proper defensive positions and coordinate their response to the new threat. What could have been a catastrophic attack on vulnerable aircraft became a manageable defensive engagement. Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie companies had used the evacuation time to consolidate their positions and prepare for the expected attack. Machine gun teams were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. Mortar crews had pre-plotted targets along the most likely approach routes. The Marines were ready, but the Taliban reinforcements had learned from the fate of the original ambush force. Instead of advancing directly into Marine positions, they established their own defensive line and began engaging from long range. What followed was a sustained firefight between prepared positions rather than the mobile assault the Marines had expected. Maria's role in the engagement was complete. Her Barrett rifle was empty and replacement ammunition was not available at her remote position. But her contribution had been decisive. Through 18 confirmed eliminations at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers, she had single-handedly disrupted a coordinated ambush and enabled 540 Marines to transform a deadly trap into a tactical victory. The firefight between the Marines and Taliban reinforcements continued for another 3 hours before the enemy finally withdrew under cover of darkness. Close air support and artillery fires, now possible with clearly separated friendly and enemy positions, convinced the Taliban that continued engagement was futile. As darkness fell over the valley, Maria began her careful withdrawal from her sniper position. The mission was complete, but she knew that her actions would be reviewed and analyzed for years to come. Few snipers in military history had achieved such decisive results at such extreme ranges under combat conditions. Captain Morrison conducted a final radio check with all units as the Marines prepared to extract from the valley. All stations, this is Bravo 6. Final casualty count is 8 wounded, no killed in action. Mission accomplished. The wounded Marines evacuated earlier that day all survived their injuries thanks to hospital corpsmen lose heroic medical care under fire, and the rapid evacuation made possible by neutralizing threats to the landing zone. Lance Corporal Kim underwent successful surgery and would eventually return to duty after extensive recovery. When the Marines finally linked up with Maria during the extraction, many were meeting their guardian angel for the first time. The young woman who had saved their lives from 2 kilometers away bore no resemblance to the larger-than-life figure they had imagined during the battle. "Ma'am," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said simply, "I don't know how you did what you did out there, but my Marines and I owe you our lives." Maria's response reflected the humility and professionalism that had characterized her entire military career. "We're all Marines, Sergeant. We take care of each other. That's what we do." The operation that had begun as a routine clearance mission became one of the most remarkable demonstrations of precision marksmanship in military history. Maria's actions earned her the Navy Cross, making her one of only a handful of female Marines to receive the nation's second-highest military decoration for valor. But for Maria, the true reward was much simpler. 540 Marines had returned home to their families because she had been in the right place at the right time with the right skills. Her grandfather's lessons about patience, precision, and courage had prepared her for the moment when it mattered most. The official after-action report documented the tactical lessons learned from the engagement, but it couldn't capture the human drama of individual Marines fighting for survival or the remarkable story of how one person's skill and determination changed the outcome of an entire battle. Years later, when Marines gathered to share war stories, they would still talk about the day when a female sniper turned the tide of battle from 2 kilometers away. For those who were there, it remained a testament to the effectiveness of superior training, individual courage, and the unbreakable bonds that unite Marines in combat. The valley in Afghanistan returned to its eternal quiet, but the story of what happened there would inspire Marines for generations to come. It proved that in modern warfare, individual skill and determination could still make the difference between victory and defeat, between life and death, between coming home or not coming home at all.